Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, I want you to imagine a corporation so unbelievably powerful that it didn't just sell products. It literally waged wars, raised its own private armies, and ruled over entire countries. I know, it sounds like pure fiction, right? Like something out of a sci-fi movie. But this was a very real entity. $7 to $8 trillion. Let that number sink in for a second. In today's money, that's the estimated peak valuation of this single organization. I mean, that makes our modern tech giants look like, well, small, regional businesses by comparison. We're talking about the Dutch East India Company, or as it's famously known, the VOC. Hands down, the absolute richest company in human history.
But all that staggering wealth, it actually brings us to a massive historical puzzle. So let's dive into this. How on earth did the richest company ever created lose absolutely everything? The story of how the seemingly unstoppable empire went completely bankrupt is honestly one of the most fascinating case studies in economics.
Section 1. Birth of a Giant.
All right, to understand their rise, we really have to travel back to the year 1602. Now, back then, the absolute core driver of global business was this massive, insatiable consumer demand for spices. We're talking pepper, cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg. It's kind of hard to wrap our heads around today, right? When we can just go grab these for a few bucks at the grocery store. But back then, these rare commodities were literally worth more than gold. To put that into perspective for you, a single sack of nutmeg could buy you a whole townhouse in Amsterdam. So as you can imagine, there was an intense financial incentive driving European nations to brave these incredibly dangerous, uncharted oceans just to get their hands on them. Naturally, this gold rush for spices created utter chaos. You had all these Dutch trading companies brutally battling each other for dominance, which ironically just drove down profits and absolutely skyrocketed their risks. Well, realizing this whole situation was completely unsustainable, the Dutch government finally stepped in during 1602 and basically forced all these fierce competitors to merge. And, just like that, the VOC was officially born. They consolidated all that fractured power into one massive, state-sponsored monopoly. But you know, the true genius of the newly formed VOC was actually their financial innovation. They introduced the world to the publicly traded company. This wasn't just, a new business opening its doors. It was a profound financial revolution. For the very first time, ordinary, everyday citizens could buy shares and invest directly in these incredibly lucrative voyages. It brought public money straight into corporate ambitions and literally changed global wealth creation forever. Plus, this revolutionary funding model gave the VOC an unprecedented amount of capital to play with.
Section 2. A company like no other.
So, at their absolute peak, the VOC acted far more like a sovereign nation than any traditional corporation we'd recognize today. I mean, their legal authority was staggering. Get this. They were authorized to build military forts, maintain massive privately owned naval fleets, and raise their own standing armies. They could sign international treaties, wage war, establish entire colonies. Oh, and they could even print their own money. Literally every single power here belongs strictly to governments today, not companies.
Utilizing all those immense powers, the VOC did something entirely unprecedented. They successfully connected Europe, Asia, and Africa, basically creating history's largest and most complex trade network. And look, when you control the biggest network of the most valuable goods on Earth, your profits are gonna explode. It's just a given. So for decades, the VOC was the undisputed king of global trade.
Section 3. The beginning of the end. Now, beneath that shiny surface of unimaginable success, some very dangerous cracks were starting to form. Because as it turns out, running a global empire with standing armies is incredibly expensive. Massive resource drains were quietly destroying their profits. You had officials out in the field secretly enriching themselves through rampant internal corruption. For instance, governors would actually load company ships with their own private goods to sell tax-free. They were literally undercutting the VOC itself. On top of that, overhead costs to maintain rotting ships and sprawling forts were just skyrocketing. And then, add in the massive financial drain of endless wars, plus fierce competition from British rivals who were violently challenging them across Asia, it was a recipe for disaster. So the outward illusion was this powerful global empire that seemed completely invincible to the rest of the world. But the grim internal reality? They were financially falling apart. Their balance sheets were absolutely bleeding. The costs of maintaining a private military and battling that systemic corruption we just talked about were growing far, far faster than their spice revenues ever could. And this brutal reality led to a pretty desperate strategy. To cover those rising expenses while their profits simultaneously declined, the VOC did what unfortunately a lot of failing businesses do. They borrowed heavily. The greatest corporate empire in the world was willingly going into overwhelming, crushing debt just to keep up the facade.
Section 4. The final collapse.
A debt spiral of that magnitude? Yeah, that's rarely something a company can just walk away from. By the late 1700s, years of corruption, terrible leadership, and those endless, costly wars had entirely drained their resources. Finally, in 1799, the hammer fell. Official bankruptcy. Nearly 200 years of global dominance ended in total ruin, and the Dutch government was forced to step in and seize whatever assets were left over. It collapsed because it lost control of the systems that created its success. I mean, it wasn't like the world suddenly stopped wanting spices. No, it was greed, internal rot, and just a complete failure of management. They built this sprawling, aggressive system that they simply couldn't rein in, and ultimately, it destroyed them from the inside out. So, what does this all mean for us today? Well, the story of the VOC serves as a timeless, really urgent warning. No company is too big to fail. Unchecked power, crippling debt, and poor leadership can bring down absolutely anyone, no matter how invincible they might seem at the time. When you look at the trillion-dollar corporate empires dominating our modern world today, you really have to ask yourself, which of them might be making the exact same mistakes right now? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing the systems around you, and I'll catch you next time.